The shadows beneath. It started on a rainy November evening, when Julie returned to her childhood home for the first time in a decade. Her parents had passed away months ago, and the house had been sitting empty, just waiting for her to gather the courage to return. Nestled deep in the woods, miles from the nearest town, the house was a place of long-forgotten memories, both good and bad. When she walked through the door, the air felt thick, the kind of heaviness that sinks into your bones. The house was just as she remembered it. Creaky floorboards, the musty smell of old wood, and the sound of rain tapping against the windows. Everything was still, except for a single portrait of her family on the wall, slightly askew, as if someone had touched it recently. Julie set her bags down and made her way to the kitchen, flicking on the lights. They buzzed weakly before illuminating the room in a dim, yellow glow. She felt an unsettling presence, but brushed it off as nerves. After all, the house had been empty for so long. Later that night, the unease grew stronger. Strange noises echoed through the hall's, faint footsteps, the creak of doors opening by themselves, and whispers that faded as soon as she tried to listen closely. Julie's childhood memories had always included a lingering fear of this house, though she had convinced herself it was all in her imagination. But tonight, it felt all too real. Unable to sleep, she wandered the dark halls with only a flashlight. As she walked past her old bedroom, the door creaked open on its own, heart pounding. She stepped inside. The room looked untouched, except for the old wardrobe in the corner that stood slightly ajar. Her breath caught as a wave of dread washed over her. When she was young, she used to have nightmares about something hiding in that wardrobe, something that watched her while she slept. Taking a deep breath, Julie approached it, telling herself it was just an old piece of furniture. She flung the door open and, to her relief, it was empty, just a pile of dust and old clothes. But as she turned to leave, she heard something, a soft rustling, like fabric shifting. She froze. Turning back, she saw the clothes begin to move on their own. A low whisper filled the air, growing louder until it was a cacophony of voices overlapping. Her flashlight flickered, plunging the room into darkness for just a moment. When the light returned, standing before her was a shadowy figure, a tall, gaunt shape with hollow eyes, staring right at her. Julie screamed and stumbled back, tripping over the edge of the bed. The figure moved closer, slow and deliberate, as if savoring her fear. She tried to stand, but her body wouldn't obey. The shadow reached out, cold fingers brushing her arm. It leaned in and she could feel its breath, hear the words it whispered, "You can't escape." But then, as suddenly as it appeared, it vanished, leaving Julie gasping in the dark room, her heart racing. The whispers were gone. The house was silent again. Shaken, Julie ran out of the room and into the kitchen, grabbing her phone. She called her childhood friend, Mark, who lived nearby, telling him everything, her voice frantic. Mark listened calmly, though his voice grew serious as she described the figure. "I'm coming over," he said. "Don't go back upstairs. Wait for me." Julie sat in the kitchen, watching the rain pour against the windows. Minutes felt like hours. Finally, there was a knock at the door. She rushed to open it, but instead of Mark, she found an old man standing on the porch, drenched from the rain. He was tall and thin, with deep-set eyes that seemed too familiar. "I'm sorry," he said in a raspy voice. "I didn't mean to frighten you earlier." Julie's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" she asked, stepping back. "I've been in this house a long time," the man said, watching, waiting. Julie's mind raced, piecing together the puzzle. "Who are you?" The man smiled, his expression one of sadness. "I was your brother." The words hit her like a punch to the gut. Her brother had died when she was just a baby. She barely remembered him. "You were supposed to be with me," the man whispered, his voice filled with longing. "But they kept you here in the light, while I remained in the dark. Waiting, always waiting." Julie stumbled back as the man's form began to flicker, his image twisting, his eyes becoming hollow once more. The realization hit her like Ice, her family hadn't just lived in this house. They had trapped something here, something dark and unnatural. And now it wanted her. The man reached out again, his hand now a shadowy claw. "It's time for you to stay," he hissed. Julie bolted for the door just as it slammed shut, locking her inside. The shadows gathered around her, cold and oppressive. And then the whispers returned, louder and more insistent, voices from the past calling her name. But in the end, the truth was much worse than any ghost. Julie hadn't returned to her childhood home at all. She had never left. And the man, he wasn't a shadow. She was. The real Julie had died in that house all those years ago, buried by the memories she'd tried so hard to escape. But in the end, the shadows always win. The house had been hers once. Now she belonged to it forever.